Is wearing the blazer.
Ah,
I was a one-year senior at a very prestigious East Coast school, and I was also a scholarship kid, so I had to wear a white jacket and serve other people meals 6 times a week. Um, it was 1966, and it was 15 years after this movie was made or thought of. And I didn't encounter any anti-Semitism, except maybe once somebody called me a Jew as he was leaving the room, but he did it playfully enough, but I felt sorry for him. But I did recognize the white jackets. I recognized the chapel service moved me most, because my first chapel, people are bowing their heads and I'm looking around, and what do I do? And I never did. But again, I was there in 1966, and this is very post-war 1952 when the movie was set. It was made 40 years later in 92. So we always have to be mindful of the era of the film and the period and when it was made and our perspective on it. But I want to tell you, hello, Miriam and Marvin. I want to tell you that it really did ring true. Those schools were very much like that. Granted, conversations like that didn't happen, but it was known that some people were fifth generation Harvard or third, or, I had a class of 240 students at my prep school, and 80 of them went to Harvard.
whoa.
And 40 went to Yale, or 45 went to Yale, and 15 went to Dartmouth. So I was slumming at Dartmouth.
Wow.
And I forget about Princeton, Stanford and Berkeley, not so many, because there weren't as many California kids there as there are now. It was also all male, by the way. So, yes.
I see that Sherry Lansing was the producer on this, and it just so happened that she was my sorority sister at Northwestern. And although there was never any overt anti-Semitism, there was a 10% quota, not one more, not one less. You never even thought about attempting to get into a Gentile sorority. And it was just, we were considered different.
May I ask what year this was, Judy?
This was, she's a couple of years older than I am, but I started there in 63. I think she was either a junior or a senior when I was a freshman.
Yeah.
So about the same time as you were in prep school.
Yeah. I went 65, 66,
Yeah.
Graduated in 66.
And, it was never overt anti-Semitism, but it was definitely.
People were too polite.
You had a feeling of being different. And for me, it was such a shock because my high school had been at least 50% Jewish. I was just always used to being in the majority.
My junior high school, this is how Jewish the suburb was. There were virtually no students and no teachers, because most of the teachers were Jewish too. It was a very good school district, but it was also, there was a very big Catholic school that shared the district, and a lot of those kids went to Catholic school. And there were other religious schools, I suppose, but it was filled with, in Cleveland, Case Western Reserve professors, children, and because the suburb was near Case Western University. And Cleveland, I don't know if you knew this, but Cleveland had the biggest Jewish population outside of New York for many years, until the river caught fire. And then many people left. And now it's a shell of itself, but there's still a thriving Jewish population in the eastern suburbs. So it rang true. Did it ring true for all of you who may have been in school in 1952? Frank? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm a little bit older than I guess most of you. I was in public high school in the town of Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. I went to a public school. We had not assembly every day. We had chapel service every day, which was mandatory.
Wow.
We had an organ. We had the Christian hymns were flashed on the screen, and we had the a cappella student choir in a balcony. And I was exposed to that 5 days a week. And then on Sunday, I took 2 streetcars into the city and went to Jewish Sunday school in what is now known, you will recognize, Squirrel Hill, which was the Jewish section of Pittsburgh. So that was public school. So a lot has happened between the 53 when I graduated from there and the mid-60s, a number of Supreme Court decisions. And I can go on more about my other experiences, but I just want to let you know that, what it was in just a few years before what you experienced.
Yeah. Well, but tell us more what you experienced. What anti-Semitism did you experience in high school?
Well, in addition, well, not really over there. I will say I lived in a small town outside of that town where my dad had the corner drugstore, the only drugstore in town for many years. And there were comments about my dad cleaning up, making all the money in town and things of that sort. My parents were very cautious about, my dad didn't want to buy a car other than a Ford from the local Ford dealer, but also because if he looked too material or whatever, people
Flashy.
Yeah. Also, my mother never, at that time, it was before clothes dryers were common, and my mother would not hang clothes out on a Sunday in respect for our neighbors. It was very much on our minds of not offending our Christian neighbors. No, we did have, I went through the grades with 2 other students my age, a boy and a girl. We split and went to different high schools later, but so we did. But we were considered a little different. We were different, and it wasn't that overt, but we were. And the great effort of my parents about fitting in and not causing waves.
Okay. So the advice from the boy's father as well as the coach rang true to you.
Yes.
The father
Yes.
said, keep it close.
Yeah, but I wish the movie, and of course movies can only be so long, and they chose to emphasize what they did. There wasn't much in there about the real religious aspect at home. You would think that there would have been a big demand for him to at least come home for the religious holiday or something, but or some semblance of observance in that immediate family. You didn't sense that at all, other than it was still a middle, a blue collar working class community. But yeah, a lot of that rang true. Absolutely.
Arlene.
Yes, I was raised in New York City, went to public schools, and did not experience any anti-Semitism to my knowledge. Everybody we had Irish, Italian, Jewish, everybody went to school together. And we did not really experience anti-Semitism until we moved to California. I remember an experience. We lived in Tarzana, and we had 2 little ones. And we went to a restaurant at night, and our daughter was in the chair that sits on the table, the infant seat. And at one point she started to cry, and somebody across the way talked about the dirty Jews who bring their kids.
Oh,
Well, wait, that
What
was
year was that? Arlene, what year was that?
That when we were in Tarzana was about
early 70s.
Okay, the 70s, early 70s.
Oh, that's terrible.
That surprises me because
Yeah.
I was in LA at the time, and I perceived Tarzana as being heavily Jewish. And
Yeah.
why was that tolerated?
Okay. And then we had sent our son to a camp in San Bernardino, a baseball camp. And he called us at one point and asked us to take him home because he was attacked basically because he was Jewish.
Wow.
And we never had that except for the first experience in Tarzana. And the most recent experience was in the 80s. We lived in Brentwood. The Brentwood School was right across the street practically from where we lived. And we went to enroll David. It's a private school, to enroll David at the Brentwood School. And we met with the headmaster. He said that basically David was a wonderful young man. His grades were great. He would make any school proud.
But
But unfortunately, if we admitted every Jewish boy who was qualified, this wouldn't be the Brentwood School.
Now, this was in the very early days of the Brentwood School. I know my
Yes.
kids went there. Was it Hunter Temple who said that?
Sound right to me.
Oh my God, I had no idea. He left about a year after we started sending
Okay.
people in there.
And that was that experience. So we moved ourselves to Beverly Hills and moved the kids to Beverly Hills schools.
Wow,
So
that was your reason for moving
in the 80s.
in the 80s, yeah. Oh, wow, that's quite a story. Maybe not for others, but for me, because we
Yeah.
lived across the street from the lower school. And
Right.
I mean, I was very guarded about them in the beginning. I think in terms of their administration, they didn't have a clue in the early days. But that's very disturbing. Now, of course, today, and when my kids graduated in like 13 and 17, there's zero tolerance there now for any kind of discrimination. Of course, you probably find that at most urban schools now, where it's as a policy matter, it's not, there's zero tolerance for any kind of discrimination. But it dies hard, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It really persists, 40 years after World War II. It's still dirty Jew, and and I don't know where it comes from. It's, they hear their grandparents say it, or an older member of their family, or they come from a place where they hadn't experienced Jews. My wife's family has a cousin who's from Alabama or North Carolina, and he told me he met people who asked him where his horns were, because didn't Jews have horns? Of course, that was in the 50s when that happened. And it was not an urban environment. Fern and then Yvette. Hi, Fern, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. I moved to Santa Monica in 1960. And despite the fact that today it looks like a profoundly Jewish place in many regards, it was a very small community. It had very few Jews. I went to Santa Monica High School. To Samo High, we had 1,000 kids in my class, and 11 of us were Jewish.
Wow.
And we were not well regarded. We were considered weird and intellectual, and there was lots of, which was not a good thing when you were living in Surf City. And it was very hard for the boys in our class, who were regularly hassled. For the girls, it was just kind of, you were considered not of the popular group. And the newspaper in Santa Monica was the Evening Outlook, which was a very conservative publication, and the John Birch Society had a big place there. Santa Monica at that time was not connected by the freeway to the rest of Los Angeles. The 10 hadn't been built yet. And LA was a cow town. We didn't have a theater. We didn't have, Jews were still serious minority. It's hard to remember that today.
You mean Santa Monica was a cow town?
LA was a cow town. We hadn't built, we had little 99-seater theaters. We didn't have a big theater. We didn't have anything. And it was a very, very Gentile community. And it was very different than coming from the East Coast, very different.
Sure.
And it's hard to remember that today, and a little bit terrifying when you look at what appears to be an arc that moves us to a place where you can remember, yeah, that's what it felt like to go to school and be told you have to read school prayers, to be considered an oddity, to be okay to say things about Jews.
Well, the irony of Santa Monica is that Donald Trump's chief advisor, Stephen Miller,
Went to my high school.
and he was Jewish,
Right.
and his parents were socialists.
Right.
I see his whole story as just rebelling against his parents by becoming an arch conservative and filled with hate towards any immigrant, which his parents' family were. It's so strange, the curve, the journey that people take to get to where they become. I can't really explain him. I've never met the man, but he's pretty vile, and he's gone on to be more vile in the private organizations that he supports now.
I do think it's interesting that the movie, there are many kinds and varieties of anti-Semitism. And we're all telling, stories of how we felt it in some different ways. But this was a particularly unique brand, the elite private school brand. It was its own special focus. It's not one I particularly experienced. I didn't live in that world, but I like the movie a lot too.
Good. All right, well, let's thank you for reminding me we have a movie to discuss.
It was subtle.
Steve Zimmerman, I didn't welcome you, but good to have you with us. So the reason I programmed this one, it's probably other than Gentleman's Agreement, which we saw a couple of years ago with Gregory Peck, great film. In many ways, that aged better than this did because it's so old, it felt new again. Its theme, the theme of Gentleman's Agreement, where Gregory Peck goes underground pretending to be a Jew so he can write a newspaper article about anti-Semitism. And he encounters it firsthand when the woman he's falling in love with thinks he's Jewish. And he's not, of course, but he has to play the role. And the conclusion of that film is that the people, the complicitous people who are silent in the face of anti-Semitism are as guilty as the perpetrators. Just like we say, all of the supposedly good Germans allowed it to happen. Silence is the worst thing in the world, especially when you know someone else is suffering and you do nothing. And not to chime in, those of you who were who was in Torah study this morning? Was I the only? Oh, Fern was. It comes, the key phrase in what Genesis 3:8 or something was, God asks Adam, "Where are you?" And of course, Rabbi David's interpreted that as a challenge to human beings. And of course, the answer comes from Abraham, where he says, "Here I am on the mountain with his son." And it's like we are all called upon to do something. And in a way, it suddenly became clear to me this morning that that's the groundwork that Genesis lays. It's like there's a connection there between human beings and goodness. You don't even have to call it a divinity, but you're expected to achieve a certain level of conduct, and some will and some won't. So it just resonated with me from this morning. I wanted to share that with you. But let's talk about what the movie does so well. And I programmed it for what it did so well. It's a bit melodramatic, right? Of course, it's obvious he's going to fall in love with the Shiksa goddess. And, there's going to be bad blood between him and Matt Damon. And that's okay. But it's still done in a detailed way. I said this in my invitation to the group. This was written by Dick Wolf, who's the creator of Special Victims Unit, SVU on television, and so many other groundbreaking and standard-setting television series. This guy's a great writer. And he turned even a melodrama into something that was unique and particular and specific. And it sort of transcended its cornball, high school drama situation. I felt it wasn't a great film, but then I thought about how the retorts that Brendan Fraser has to all the accusations of being a Jew are brilliantly written. And he's like a voice of logic in a voice of illogic. And I want to go over them with you because the way he rebuts these claims about who Jews are is brilliant, just from an intellectual point of view. And that's Dick Wolf's doing. Okay, so who remembers when the first time, we know he's apprehensive. No, Dad says, don't tell him you're Jewish, keep it close. And the coach who picks him up at the rail after the bus drops him off, he can't say, are you Jewish? He says, is there anything you won't eat? This veiled way of, please fill me in. I know you're Jewish, but I can't bring it up with you. He knows because he scouted the guy and told the Peter Donat, yes, we have to get this guy in here. He's our only chance at winning this year. And his advice is, listen, these kids are entitled and they haven't had to work the way you and I have. So there's this working class bond that goes there where the football coach is thrilled to be a football coach at such a great school, but even he knows that these people wouldn't associate with him if he weren't the coach. So there's this shared victimization that is expressed in that scene. But he can't bring himself to be totally open with the guy. So that bond only goes so far. The next indication comes in the dormitory room. And when is the first defamatory remark leveled? And Judy, you're muted.
When he said he tried to Jew me down.
Right.
And I actually, Jim, quit a job when my boss said that.
And what year was that? Excuse me.
That was about 81, maybe.
And where was it?
Okay, I was working in an art gallery in Culver City. The guy who was my boss was sexually harassing me all the time in a very subtle way. He'd pinch my behind, or he'd, go by me and casually rub against my boobs. And I needed the job. I needed the money. So I kept my mouth shut. And because it was way before Me Too. And then when he said he tried to Jew me down, I looked at him and I said, Chuck, I quit. I'm out of here. Goodbye. And I walked out the door.
And in the moment, as soon as you heard him say that?
Yes.
And was he
and
saying
he knew I was Jewish.
Okay. Was he saying it in front of you or to you?
Yes. Well, I don't remember if he was saying it in front of me or to me. I don't remember. I was just so offended. That offended me more than the gestures that he had been making.
Okay. Well, I think he was looking for an excuse because he knew you were onto him because you rejected his crude advances. It's like that kind of a response can come out of guilt. Get the sign of my own sins away from me. Don't remind me that, I wasn't cool enough for you and that you rebuffed me.
Nah, I don't think so.
No,
I wanted to say one other thing too, and it's in response to whoever said that their father wouldn't buy a good car. Same exact thing in my family. My father was a very successful pediatrician. All his life, he wanted a Cadillac, but he only bought Fords and Chevys because he didn't want to look like he was being too flashy.
My father was the same way. He would, by the way, Frank, he was a pharmacist too, and he didn't want to appear to be too prosperous in front of his staff when he drove to work. But when he retired, then he got his Cadillac.
Mm-hmm.
Until we took the keys away. I think Brad and Arla and then Joanne.
Yeah, first of all, Judy, I started Northwestern in 1964, a year behind, and I had a very similar type of experience. So I just want to echo your words. And I'm curious, what high school did you go to?
I grew up on the south side of Chicago and I went to Bowen. How about you?
Niles East.
Okay. Oh, you went to a much better school than I did.
Northsiders. Okay. And Jim, I think you touched on this issue just a minute ago with the coach, and that is this whole issue of class.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm not sure that the movie address that, at least from my perspective, as much as I would have wanted it to.
Didn't for me either.
Because we see the other white shirts who are not Jewish, but we don't have insights into how they're being accepted or treated by the elite of the school, because this movie was really about social capital.
Yeah.
And you know, is a Pierre Bourdieu study of social capital, because the whole movie revolves around your connections and your the network that you develop at a school like that, which catapults you in life. And without that network, as we've seen with that how devastating it was with that student who left school, you know, your life is over, essentially.
Well, but not for some of the others, you know, like Matt Damon says at the end, I'm still going to go to Harvard.
And he is
Yes.
because he has social capital.
Right. But this issue of class really brings up something very important. How do the guys, the bros, as we call them today in the dorm, refer to each other? By nicknames. They can do that because they don't have to say you're a Jew or you're this or that. The guy with the glasses is Magoo, as in Mr. Magoo. And Dylan is just Dylan because he's legendary. That's his family name. And there are other nicknames. It's like they all share. There's nothing to tease each other about other than these very particular traits that aren't shared. So they share so much on the other side. So they're safe. You know, the guy with the glasses, who turns out to be the most virulent of all the anti-Semites, is Magoo. And I found that really interesting. I think Joanne is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the Jew Me Down.
Joanne, I'm sorry, Arla was next. You're next, Joanne.
Okay, so first of all, on that comment of I Jewed him down, when I saw the film, and I'm sure this probably resonated with many of you in the group, I was taken by the fact that this is currently being used as currently as the past week. One of the legislatures I read, I'm not sure if it was Kentucky, one of them, where somebody said, a legislator says, I Jewed him down, or it came up. So this is something that is unfortunately still popular and is still being heard. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I loved the scene before Brendan Fraser gets to the school, when he's with the father. I don't know how many of you picked up on this. He speaks Yiddish. The father speaks Yiddish, and he says something, give or take, like "Believe the kin, sei gesund," you know, something like "Beloved child, may you be healthy." And I just loved the way that there was no translation of that, if you noticed, into English. Right. And it just, you know, it was such a warm feeling. I just loved that touch. And it really showed that, you know, there was that connection to the old world, even though, and also you noticed Brendan wasn't looking puzzled or saying.
No, he knew, he was fluent enough to understand.
Yeah,
he says like Grandpa says. Yeah.
Exactly. So he, you know, so that, I thought that was a great touch. Then the third thing I wanted to mention is, again, when Brendan Fraser is at the school initially, when he first, because you were talking about all this about belonging and relationships, he hasn't been given his school tie yet. That's the name of the film. So so his roommate would have to dress up. So the roommate says, "You haven't been given your tie yet. Here, I have an extra one. Take mine." And I just love that double entendre of, you know, the actual physical tie, that yes, he didn't have the tie, but the idea of ties, that he didn't belong, that he was the outsider, the stranger.
Now, I think, Joanne, you're next. I just wanted to mention something. How does David Green win himself over into the rest of the guys in the dormitory, because he's the one who ridicules that awful French teacher by making jungle sounds, you know, and oh my God, he had an act of courage there that made all the other guys admire him, because they would never have dreamed of doing that, but the newcomer could do it. And of course, he did it well enough behind the guy's back so that he couldn't be caught. But it caught on, and of course, it played in later when they bring his car into his room, and they're all swinging from the pipes, you know, making jungle sounds again. So it's this guy had an effect on those. It was like the ability to speak out and be critical and to call a spade or a bigot, or an asshole, was admired by these other people. They loved him for that. And so there's even a line in the movie, "You're in, boy," after that performance, you know, you won everybody over. So he's braver than the others, you know, and brave to the end, you know, it's who he is. Joanne.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the "Jew me down" expression again. I was working with a Black fellow and we were having a discussion and he used that phrase. And I stopped and I said, "Did you just hear what you said?" He says, "Oh yeah." I said, "Jew him down, you know, Jew me down." I said, "No." I said, "Really, did you listen? Did you hear what you said?" And then he just stopped because he knew I was Jewish. He said, "Oh my gosh." He said, "I've used that expression my whole life and I never stopped to realize what I was saying." He says, "I'm never going to do that again."
Yeah.
And hopefully he didn't. I don't know, you know, because he left the company shortly after that. But that was very interesting.
I mean, it's a reflex for some people, just like David Green's father says something in Yiddish to him, a blessing. You know, it's like that, it's in their DNA because they grew up with that.
Exactly.
You know, and
He never realized exactly what he was saying.
And I don't believe that all these white supremacists, you know, the ones who said Jews will not replace us and all that, the Oath Keepers, I don't believe they came to this late in life. I believe they heard stuff like that and they glommed onto it as young adults. And because it's a sign, again, I'm going back to this notion that kind of bigotry is a sign of injury and hurt or inadequacy. And they grew up hearing that as a release valve for the feelings of inferiority that other people had when they saw a Jewish doctor with a better car or a better educated Jewish person, or and it's not just with Jews. I mean, the fear of, I don't want to speak about the fear of Black people because I'm not familiar with it, but you know, you can see how some people resent the fact that, oh my God, Black people are getting educated and they're a threat to our previous dominance, even though our dominance was immoral. There's a lot of denial that goes on whenever you see hatred or, you know, demonization like that. And people don't realize what they're doing, like your business acquaintance did. It's like, it's just part of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're lucky he was decent enough to fess up to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it probably changed his life quite a bit because he carried himself forward and with a greater sensitivity for other people.
Yeah, I hope so. I think so.
Okay. Anybody else? Yvette, did we? Lower left corner, dear. You're muted, Yvette. Frank, unmute your wife.
There we go.
There we go.
The movie was a great movie. Thanks for picking it. As far as Jew 'em down, first of all, my parents moved from a small town outside of Pittsburgh, a steel town, when I was about 5 years old, because I was in kindergarten and they were calling me Kike. So my parents moved to Squirrel Hill, and I grew up in Squirrel Hill and went to a public high school in Squirrel Hill. We did have to read the Bible, but we didn't have anything else. But that was a state thing at that time, state law. But I had no discrimination in high school that was of any memory to me at all. My friends were both Jewish and Gentile. My whole crowd was. But then after I graduated from PT school, and even in PT school, I was the only Jew in my class when I was in PT school, the physical therapy that was. And I had nothing there. Everything was fine. And they knew I was Jewish and everybody got along well. But then I went to work at National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. And Frank and I were married. And I came home and I said, they're saying Jew them down and a lot of things that they think I'm not Jewish. They don't have any idea. So I had to come up with a way to let them know that I was Jewish. So Frank said, take it from beef sandwich. But instead, the next time they said something, it was one woman in particular. I said to her, I said, I really don't like that. I am Jewish. And she said, no, you're not. You're just making that up. So I had a talk with her. Yeah, she didn't even believe it. So, I mean, I think these things vary from place to place and people to people. It was National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, which wasn't a strictly Gentile or strictly Jewish, but it was probably a very high percentage of Gentiles that lived there. But so I had the same thing happen to me.
Okay, Donna and then Doris.
I just want to say that I converted, and I'm so glad that I did. I came from North Carolina and I left there because of the bigoted prejudice, hate that they had there for different people that are different. And with a disability, I'm different too. So I've experienced, I understand. And I'm so proud that I am Jewish and I proudly wear my Star of David all the time. And I just want to say I love you guys. I'm sorry you all go through that.
Have you ever gone through anything anti-Semitic since you converted?
Yes, I heard someone say, over here where I live in the hood, they have these street vendors and they're out there, let me Jew you down. And I said, don't say that. And then one guy goes, I said, I'm Jewish. He goes, oh, I hate the Jews. So then I went and bought the kids some sandwiches. He goes, ma'am, I'm sorry for saying that. I changed my mind about Jewish people because I was feeding the hungry homeless kids out there we were talking to. And I brought sandwiches. He goes, I've changed my opinion about the Jews. I'm sorry I said that, but I've had that experience.
Okay. And Doris is next.
Yeah, I had a couple of things I wanted to say. Number one, I thought it was interesting that he put on the yarmulke and he went to the church and he said prayers during Rosh Hashanah. I thought that was quite an interesting touch in the film.
What does that tell you about him? How did that change or improve your feelings about him?
Well, I always liked him. I always thought he was a good Jew. I don't think he ever tried to deny that he was Jewish, but the opportunity didn't come up. And in that moment, he was going to do what his father asked him to do. His father said, "Hey, it's Rosh Hashanah. You need to go and pray," and he did.
I want to bring up something thought that Fern raised in the chat. She said, I think the boys at the prep school did not feel inferior, they felt superior. I totally agree. What I meant was their superiority is a defense mechanism for some deep insecurity. They don't know it. All they feel is the superiority because it comforts them. And this is, those of us who have been around the block a couple of times know that sometimes you just have to feel vulnerable and be vulnerable and allow it. Otherwise, you're not human. And all your efforts to eradicate somebody being better, are vain. They're for naught because nothing's going to change other people.
I do think, though, that those who feel, somewhat superior feel they don't want to give up power. Most people do not willingly give up power. And they certainly weren't going to do it. They had an enormous amount of power. They could get into Harvard whether they knew anything or not. They rode on their privilege. And I think that movie illustrated it very clearly. I'm sorry, Doris.
No, I just wanted to comment on a job situation that I found myself in, and it was really first time that ever happened to me. I'm from Boston. I went to public schools, and the school started, by the time I was in high school, the school started to become totally integrated. We all had friends that were Black and we had friends that were Gentile, and there was never any anti-Semitism. I never heard one single word. Come to California, get my first job for an insurance company, and I'm sitting there, the gal that I was sitting opposite was obviously had a German name, and I not that it mattered at the moment. And she was the one that, you remember they had the plugins for the telephones? What did they call those things, you know?
What
Headsets?
operator.
Hmm?
Headsets?
No, you plugged in the phone and you got the calls through
Oh,
the
the switchboard operator.
switchboard. Thank you. And I sat opposite her and I was doing my thing and we were just kind of chatting. The rest of the crew was upstairs. They had an upstairs and a downstairs, and we were downstairs. And I don't know, one day I said something to her like I was looking for a place to live. And so I said to her, I'm not really familiar with the area. I said, do you know anything about the Fairfax area?
The mover saying too many Jews.
And
in
she
the-
looked at me and straight in the eye and she said, you don't want to live there.
Not Lebanon.
I said, why not? She said, the Jews live there like that with the
Oh my
hatred, the venom in her mouth. The Jews live there. You know what I said to her? I don't know what's wrong with that because I happen to be Jewish. I told her right on the spot, I wasn't going to put up with that kind of crap. And by the time I went up for my noon break, used to have coffee breaks. Everybody in the place knew about it. The boss, I swear to God, the boss came up to me, Doris, I want you to know if you ever need to take a day off for the holidays, please do so. I mean, they couldn't do enough for me, but it was just a really unusual experience in a job to find that happening, you know.
What year was that, Doris? What year?
I'm trying to think of the year. Was probably in the 60s, 70s, somewhere,
When did we
somewhere
move
like
to,
that, you know.
Frank, please mute yourself if you're going to talk, Frank. So I
Sure.
want to make an observation. This is the second comment we've had tonight, how, well, I'm from the East Coast and I never experienced anti-Semitism until I came to California.
Yeah.
You know, now what does that mean? I think it means that until World War II and the huge influx of refugees, there weren't a lot of Jewish people in California. I mean, granted, the population was much reduced, but there were that many fewer. There was an immigration to California from Arkansas during the Dust Bowl. I know not a lot of Jews came over across the country, you know. So I cannot corroborate this. I'm not an anthropologist or sociologist, but I think that, you know, Los Angeles didn't explode until after World War II. And the oil that was discovered and the aircraft industry, the bombers we made for World War II, it's a huge exodus from other places because there were jobs here. And, you know, people needed doctors and lawyers. And Pat Brown, Governor Brown, didn't he start the UC system in the 50s, where it was almost free education for all California young people? Yeah, I mean, it was a relatively new cultural phenomenon to have a lot of Jews living here.
UCs were around much longer, Jim, because I went to UCLA's 100th birthday a few years ago.
Okay.
So
Pat
the
Brown
UC
expanded, okay. But he
maybe expanded.
Expanded. You know, he tried to make it available for all residents of the state. So maybe
Anyway,
that's an explanation.
I was just gonna say, I was born in 52. You guys are amazing. I was just a baby when you got started.
All right, well, let's keep on with the movie because it does provoke interesting things. Oh, okay. Somebody mentioned the chapel scene where he's playing he's praying, and the headmaster walks in, and the headmaster starts out paying him a compliment. You were very determined when you were playing in that game, and implications, that's why you won. But you people are very determined. Again, straight out bias there. You people blaming a part for the whole, a whole for the part. You know, all your Jews are determined. Well, there's more of a history to that we don't have to get into. But what does he come back with? You know, the headmaster says, what about the meek shall inherit the earth, which is, I guess Jesus said that, and it's frequently quoted. And Brendan Fraser comes back, and what does he say? He said, we'll see how meek they are when they take over. So that's a statement of power. You know, whoever is in power will not be meek, will throw their weight around because they are in power. And this is typical of the whole movie, where the Jewish person turns around what the anti-Semite says into something wiser and more observant. It happens again and again. Did anybody else have that feeling in that scene?
Absolutely.
He had the balls, just like he had the balls to make fun of the prissy French teacher in the dorm room. He had the balls to stand up to the headmaster, and even the headmaster has to say, "I'll forgive you for that, or for this trespass." You know, now if they found anybody praying in a university chapel, they'd say, "Please come back," even if you're on your knees, you know, bowing to Allah. You know, it's like it's just too PC to not allow prayer of any kind in any religious. I mean, look, if you're at John Paul Jones University, that's something else. But you know, at a public university, you'd never find that. Arla, and then Natalie, and then Steve Zimmerman. I'm sorry, Steve. I just saw your hand.
So, okay, so yeah, I wanted to address that whole scene in the chapel. You know, it's interesting and very poignant that right before that scene, Brendan Fraser takes off his Magen David, and he but
Okay.
but it was actually that whole Rosh Hashanah scenario, or what I call the you know, the Sandy Koufax dilemma. For me, it was the time I was actually disappointed in him, because his father asked him to come home for the holiday. He said, you know, come home next Saturday, it's Rosh Hashanah. And he said, no, I have, you know, there's a big game. And the father pleaded with him, and he didn't come home. So I was actually a little disappointed in him at that point.
He couldn't leave.
He couldn't miss the ball game.
Yeah.
He had to play.
That's why he was there.
Yeah.
Why he was there.
Yeah.
But Sandy Koufax skipped the World
everybody,
Series.
please mute yourselves until Arla's done.
What I found very intriguing was that what prayer was David, we keep calling him Brendan, but what prayer was he saying in the chapel?
Alvinu Malkeinu, our
Bingo. And what's the point of the Avinu Malkeinu? You know, Chatanu lefanecha, we sinned in front of you, you know, we sinned against you. So I found that so interesting that was and again, with no translations, you know, so if you weren't Jewish, like, probably went over your head. But basically, to me, that kind of spoke volumes, because it was almost like he was atoning to God that he did play in the game and he didn't observe Rosh Hashanah. He didn't go home for the holiday.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up that scene, because there's another refutation that David Green does here. The headmaster says, so was it worth it? You know, first he dismisses him and he says, oh, wait a second, was it worth it? You know, abandoning your tradition. And he said, well, I didn't abandon yours. You know, it's like a slap in the face. I was better to your tradition than you are being to mine now by saying I have no right to be here. I thought that was brilliant, that you just, you know, when you're confronted, no matter what color you are or religion, when you're confronted with such paltry reasoning, it's very important to speak up and let them hear the alternative, or to broaden the picture so you're forcing other people to see it both ways. Now, I want to quote Rabbi Nickerson in the Yom Kippur service, for those of you who saw it. What was he talking about? How both sides have to learn to listen to each other. It's about, what am I missing here? It's not about embracing the antagonism. It's searching for what you share. And even if you don't find it, the point is your search allows you to make this emotional and intellectual comparison to another person, which your previous bias did not allow you to. They were less than you. They were the dirty Jew. They were the overly determined people. You know, they were all about the money. And you know, as long as you deal in labels, you'll never get to know anybody. And I thought that was a wonderful retort. And it made me think of so much, that why can't you honor my traditions the way I honored yours? And it left the headmaster speechless. So that's the power of it. Steve Zimmerman.
Yeah, that was actually the point I was going to make that you just made. But also, the father David's father is naive on some level, sending him into that environment, right? And not expecting him to have to play football games as opposed to go to temple on Rosh Hashanah, and put the son in the position of having to be more mature and pragmatic than the father, because he was the one going through the experience. So that struck me, the naivety of the father.
Yeah, you're right. And then he says, well, at least go to synagogue or go to temple. By the way, did anybody have a problem with the casting of Ed Lauter as the father?
Yeah, he didn't seem very Jewish.
And he's had a great career. I think he may have passed away recently. He had a great career playing the thug and the heavy, and the guy who never understands. So, I mean, he did an adequate job, especially with the Yiddish. But he has such a distinctive look. I knew right away who he was. It just, no, this can't be. But who knows? The price was probably right. Anybody else at this point? Or should we? Gail Siegel has her hand raised. And then, I'm sorry, Gail, let's let Natalie go, and then you.
Okay. Through the movie, I made notes of all the anti-Semitic remarks. And I wanted to call attention to the dance scene. When two of the boys see, what was his name again? David, how beautifully he was dancing with his girlfriend.
Yeah, oh, right.
The comment he makes is, gee, he really can dance. He must be half nigger.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the Jew wasn't enough. The nigger comes even more clearly of how these kids felt they were so superior to everyone with their great wealth. And they were also bright. They were a bright group. They didn't just get in there because they had money. But we know that many of them are going to go to Harvard and elsewhere because their family name will push them right into those schools. So I love the film, and I just want to know if anybody else had anything to say about that dance scene.
I see some heads nodding. Let me say, let me augment what you said, Natalie. Yes, they're going to go to school anyway, but you know what drives that? Contributions to the school. They can buy their way in with their name up on a building.
Yep.
And look at the USC athletic scandals.
Oh yeah, everything.
These wealthy people think they can get in, and it's not just USC; it's many other institutions. And can you blame these nonprofit institutions because they can't, get as much money on a tuition as they'd like? Somebody has to pay the scholarships. You can just hear all the defenses coming, but it's just the way we do things here.
Jim, it wasn't the athletic scandal. It was the buy-in for anybody who could.
Right. But it was the athletic coaches who said, "Oh, this is a great soccer player or a fencer," and they were barely JV, at USC. It's just dishonesty. The money went to the particular athletic program, so they were buying the coaches off, buying the coaches' approval. Okay, so let's move on. Then there's this very cool discussion in the dormitory about all the Jews and commies at Harvard. Remember, this is 1952, so that clearly existed, and Jews were commies. Look at the Rosenberg's case. I mean, they were spies, but they were kind of, hung too abruptly. And then they're talking about, somebody says, well, don't go to Harvard because that's where the Jews are. Well, you don't have to associate with them. And then David Green says, how would you even know if you were around a Jew? And then Matt Damon says, oh, how could you not? You can't mistake a Hebe. So it's kind of funny. But then I think something happens and the scene gets cut short, but the point is made. And I want to bring up, I've told this anecdote before, Mayor Tom Bradley was the first Black mayor of Los Angeles. And some stupid person at some point asked him, why can't the blacks be more civilized? Look what the Jews and the Italians and the other migrants to this country have made of themselves. You know, why are the blacks that way? And Bradley looked at the guy and he said, color, baby, you know, and it was a white person. So he's saying systemic racism. You know, we couldn't avoid it. You people could because you were white.
Absolutely.
You know? And by the way, you know, looking to Father Coughlin and other people before World War II, the Germans, you know, FDR considered having German concentration camps during the war too, but he was told that 30% of the New York population is of German extraction. So he couldn't do that. And they were white. So, you know, it's like people get a pass and people don't get a pass unfairly. You know, and Jews are lucky because we were white, you know, and could pass, you know, until the joke about what's it like to kiss a Jewish boy, did you get stuck on his nose? You know, that's like meaningless, but it hurt her, and she was more hurt by her friends. We can talk about that scene later when we come to it, but it's like the racism, I'm glad you brought that up. The racism was very much there. Natalie, that's just the next step after Jews, you know, because blacks weren't a threat because they were the underclass and Jews were threatening to the middle class and the upper class because they were rising. The suicide. This also because they don't know he's Jewish yet. So the attempted suicide by McGivern, right? It's awful. By the way, teachers like that did exist in my school, in the prep school I went to, and they even existed in my public high school. And there was always a cadre of young men around them, young students, which, you know, in hindsight made it look a little odd. But David Green has the courage in front of the whole crowd as they wheel McGivern off to the ambulance. He lunges at McCleary and says, you did this to him. You took him down. And Matt Damon has to pull him away and read him the riot act about how this is the way it is here. We do what they tell us for a while, and they give us position and money, and then we have our turn. Steve Zimmerman? Oh, I'm sorry.
He even went further. He said, I'm going to get you for this, which is actually probably a threat that is not appropriate. But yeah, he took it even further.
But again, he did what the others didn't have the courage to do, was to not only ridicule the guy by making jungle sounds in the dorm room, but by saying the truth about what happened, you know, in front of everybody. It was probably known by more than just the class, and everybody knew him as being a rotten guy. But he's saying what everybody knows. He had the courage to speak out. Gail, up to you now.
It's Connie, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This was a situation when I was graduating from college at University of Toronto and was looking for a job. I'm an actuary, and I went to the actuarial fund of one insurance company, and two gentlemen were very polite and said thank you. And of course, I never heard from them. Another one said, Jews this and Jews this, and he's talking for 20 minutes or half an hour about Jews. And I figured, well, what a waste of my time. And then he said, we'll start you tomorrow for the job.
It was a test.
I don't know what it was, but I started the first job, and I learned a lot.
Well, that's probably why I knew you'd be a good candidate. Arla, and then Judith.
Yes, I wanted to go back to that comment about using at the dance using the word, it wasn't just the racism, it wasn't just the students that were racist, but the teachers as well. Because when you go back to that first dormitory scene with McCleary, and he's playing a song that he's picked up, I guess, like on some break thing. And I'm guessing it's an African-American artist, because McCleary says, turn that off. And then he says, I'm not going to have the jungle in here.
Yeah.
And so, which of course then leads to the jungle sounds and ape imitations, etc. So so you've got again, my point is that this racism didn't only emanate from the students, it was from the staff as well.
Right. Judith?
I wanted to go back to something that Arla said about the chapel, because I too had that reaction of some disappointment until he did go and pray later, that he ignored the fact that it was Rosh Hashanah, because I just kept thinking about Sandy Koufax not playing in the World Series because it was Yom Kippur. So I did feel that he redeemed himself by going to the chapel and saying Avinu Malkeinu. I was disturbed, and I have to say that I have had this conversation with my son for at least 20 years, where, well, I can't go to temple, Mom, because I have to work. Or something, or I got a test or whatever. And I always bring up Sandy Koufax. But of course, Sandy Koufax hadn't done his thing in 1952.
Thank you. Practical. I didn't have a choice when I was that age.
You didn't have a choice?
No, I went 3 days a week to temple and hated all of it because it was an era when they didn't make it meaningful or relevant. It was a conservative synagogue, and I didn't see any devotion at home. I just saw an attendance to ritual. There was an ethnic connection, absolutely, but the subject of morals, ethics, religion never crossed our dining table.
Yes, and I think Sandy Koufax could get away with it, Judith. Most people can't, right?
Well, but okay, Steve, I wasn't going to comment. Apparently, Sandy Koufax himself says, well, it wasn't all religious, it was also a scheduling thing. And I wish I could remember the quote better, but it basically saying it was the rotation, it wasn't me. I'm not trying to take credit for it as a good Jew. Anybody want to chime in on that? If you have facts, wave your hand if you have facts.
May I say something?
Donna?
Yeah, David was just getting started in school, and he was a quarterback, and Mr. Koufax already had made it big in the big leagues, and that was how he was going to get to Harvard for that scholarship. He had to play.
All right, it's a good point. But that's why you see the headmaster saying, was it worth it to betray your tradition? Well, he's behind a school that is all about betraying other people's traditions and supporting only his own. So it's like, it's such an arrogant thing to say. And that's why Green comes back and says, would you rather I had broken your tradition? You would have been really pissed off if I didn't play.
Totally agree.
There's self-interest, but it's also, he's saying, I had why can't you respect my tradition when I respected yours? It's hypocrisy. So that's another thing you throw back in somebody's face. I think the Reiners have something to say. And Fern.
Just in comment to what you were saying, it's a no-win. Whatever. If he was too determined, then he was too pushy. If they were the opposite of that, they would be too lazy. There was just no win. If he didn't respect his own traditions, that was bad. If he didn't respect their traditions, it was bad. It was all BS.
Right. It's like the school's culture said, well, if we can't claim him as our own, we're going to bash him. But if it were Matt Damon, succeeding and making the block or being the quarterback, then they would have just celebrated him to no end and given him an award in 3 years, like his brother. All kinds of hypocrisy. Joel and his girlfriend there.
Okay,
Not Frank. The Jaspins are going to talk. Frank, you're next.
I have a couple of comments. One, in the very beginning of the movie, before he leaves Scranton, he gets into a fight because someone has made some anti-Semitic remarks. So you know that he is a fighter and he's
Right.
going to defend himself. When he goes to school and he starts wanting to fight with the French teacher, I think that's because his background is different than the other boys' backgrounds. He's not privileged, and he's used to standing up for himself. And so his wanting to fight there is in character and is supported by what he did before he left Scranton.
Right. That's what that scene means. That he's a fighter. But it wasn't meant to say he's a hothead who flies off the handle. He stands up for the right thing.
Yes, absolutely.
That's his ethics.
And the other thing, I think the school is all about entitlements, and all of these kids feel that they are entitled to what they are getting, even though they have to work for it.
Well, but you see, let's go back to that. It's an important comment, because what we learned in this film is that there's a burden. The entitlement carries a cost with it. This immense pressure to fit in, to follow the family line, to at least get grades good enough to get into Harvard or Princeton. And you see the one kid, McGivern, crumble because he can't take the pressure. And it's not, Cleary is exploiting, he's coming down real hard on this kid. And I think it's because of his own insecurities, which are not going into. But he knows that, he's pushing him to his breaking point, and he succeeds. And the breaking point comes when he's feeling his family's pressure. And it's like he's figured out the vulnerability there. In a way, it's what Matt Damon says to David Green on the pier. This is how they control us. We got to toe the line, do what they do, and they'll give us the money and let us run the show for a while. That's the contract. And if you break it, you're out. Of course, Matt Damon's family can buy his way back into Harvard, even if he got thrown out of the prep school. And because he's fifth generation, and his brother, it's a prestigious family. Doris? Oh, I'm sorry. The Reiners are next, and then Doris.
When you mentioned the casting of David Green's father, I immediately recognized him as a character actor from, I thought, the 50s or 60s, way back. I just associated. And that led me to say something we haven't discussed. It's not the deep ethical, moral issues we've been discussing in anti-Semitism, but I think that they did a bang-up job of reflecting the era in the 50s. It was such a nostalgia trip for me.
Yeah.
From the fashions to the cars to whatever. And it made, and it was important. This was filmed in the 60s, I believe.
92.
Yeah.
Set in the 50s.
92.
Set in 52.
Yeah,
not in 92.
a lot later. And yet it made as we said, a lot of things have changed, and a lot regarding anti-Semitism hasn't changed. But it made more meaningful of fitting into that era because of the authenticity of the era portrayed.
I think you're right. They did a great art direction had to do with it, but also was the attitudes. These stupid things the white guys said. It would have been. You could believe that they were said in 1952, like Harvard, Jews and commies. That's so authentic for the era. Okay, Doris, you had something to say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, did David Green's father know he was sending him to an all
Yeah, I think so.
Gentile school where there would be no other Jews around?
I'm sure
he was a religious man,
Yeah, but like he said to his son, I never had a chance to go to Harvard, but you do, so don't blow it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody wants their children to do better. And so he was bought too. This dream, this fiction,
yeah.
better world, and we all bought into it. When I went to college, it was like, well, this is what we did. We went to a good college and learned a trade or a craft, and you did well because our parents actually went to college. My parents were born in 1915 and 1917, and both of them went to college. And a lot of the normal Gentile white kids didn't have parents like that. I had great aunts who went to college, and they were born in the 1880s. So, so much of it, is the luck of the family you're born into. I hate to say that, but and you can't say that to your own kids. You don't know how lucky you are. But let's face it, with all the people we've met in our lives, in the professional world, commercial world, that you were really lucky to be where you were when you were, and to have the upbringing you did. Because look at all of us now. We may despise people here, but there's a certain level of accomplishment, and it's like this. It's a heritage. It's not just a Jewish heritage. It's an ethnic heritage. It's a cultural heritage of being in America for a long enough time to have assimilated to the point where you can rise. And we're trying to change that. So, worthy people get to rise as soon as possible, but we have a long road to hoe. All right. Brad Ellison, did you have something to say?
Yeah, real quickly about the father. I thought that the father was perfectly cast. For a Jew to survive in Scranton at that time, he had to assimilate, and that father was perfectly assimilated. And the other comment that I wanted to make was about the French teacher. I thought that the French teacher was probably the most nuanced character in the movie. Yes, we've talked about his flaws, but on the other hand, he was extremely demanding, and he was extremely progressive in his, at least for being a French speaker, and for that period, to insist that his students speak only in French in class was pretty advanced thinking at that time, and he was fluent. Now his accent wasn't the best, but he was fluent in the language, and it just showed you a bit of the quality of teaching that you would find at these prep
school like that. I agree.
And it was somewhat nuanced. It wasn't all bad.
No, having gone to a school like that, there were demanding teachers like that. They knew their stuff. It's not like they wanted you to do the work for them. But none were as cruel as he. It's a movie, so they had to make him super cruel. We're running out of time. Oh my God, it's 10-9. This must have been a good movie for us.
Jim?
Yeah.
And just to clarify, Sandy Koufax responded to a higher calling on Yom Kippur in 1965.
Right.
That was what he refused to pitch on. It didn't fall into the Rosh Hashanah. And I just wanted to add that my mother went to a high school in Squirrel Hill called Alderdice High School. I don't know if that fit into anything to anybody else. You knew about the Alderdice High School? Yeah. And one of the things that I felt about the movie is I felt Jim tense. It hit me. And I sat there for almost 2 hours feeling David Green's feelings of being an outcast. And I sat there in a great deal of tenseness.
Yeah. Well, he did want to be successful there, and he was successful there. But you felt the tension that he must have been feeling. That created empathy that movies do so well. You could put yourself in his situation. I want to talk about the girlfriend. We haven't talked much about her. She's a victim too, of course, of her own upbringing. But when he's explaining to her why he hid his Jewishness from her, he goes into this speech about how I wanted to play football. I wanted to win games. I wanted to have friends. That's why I didn't say anything. It's not that I lied. I was just avoiding telling the truth. I mean, we've heard this before from many people. And they all said, well, he didn't tell us he was Jewish. And the answer is, well, you didn't ask. And to the roommate, he says, well, I'm different. I'm a Methodist, you know, and oh, well, is that different from a Lutheran? Well, no, we're the same, but you're different. And how are we different? And David talks him into it's called reductio ad absurdum. He takes his own, the other guy's line of thinking and reduces it to where it doesn't make any sense. The contradiction is inherent in the statement. But back to the girl, she says, you lied to me. And he says, I lied to my father. I lied to myself. You see, and he's trying all along not to lie to himself. And that's why he has to go after Cleary, because it's who he is. He's fighting for the underdog there. And we realize that the other guys, the guys who are fifth generation Harvard, are lying to themselves, like Matt Dillon, who's capable of cheating and defeated and embarrassed because his older brother outshines him. They're in denial. They are lying to themselves about their own unhappiness. But you can't blame David Green for saying, I wanted to be part of it. And then she says, why didn't you tell me? And he says, because I wanted. I couldn't. Oh, she says, you're the first Jew I met who denied that he was Jewish. And he said, I'm the same guy that you met. I'm not different now because you know I'm Jewish. And she admittedly says, I know. But then she can't go on with it. You know, even she knows what the right thing to do is, but she's a victim as well because she can't. She can't go against her own upbringing. I'm just trying to wrap this up now with important points. Oh, and then there's this lovely confession at the end where one of the guys in the tribunal says, I confess I'm an anti-Semite, but I still don't believe he did it because I got to know him. He's the first Jew I got to know. And I'm basing this on character, you know, as Martin Luther King would say, the depth of his character. And it didn't jive with me that he would cheat. That's a very important thing to include. Mitch, go ahead.
I just, that scene in the quote courtroom,
yeah,
where they're deciding, reminded me of 12 Angry Men and the Henry Fonda.
You know, I've almost programmed that here and it's been remade a couple of times, but nothing does it justice. I would love to play that. It's Henry Fonda, Lee J. Cobb, a bunch of great actors. It's all in a courtroom. And one by one, Henry Fonda, who's the jury foreman, talks people down from their premeditated biases, you know, the prejudices they bring to it. And again, he only tries to establish reasonable doubt among the 11 other jurors, who are all men. It's a great film, a very important film. If, you know, it's a very dated film, but I would program it again if people wrote to me and said they wanted to do it. Okay,
it wouldn't surprise me that the director saw that as a part of the film, including that scene and the size of the table and where the leader sat at the head of the table.
By the way, the director of 12 Angry Men was Sidney Lumet,
right,
who has a very solid Jewish core to all his work. And I'd love to do a retrospective of his work. Who's seen The Verdict here with Paul Newman? Okay, that's a lot of us. Should we not see it and discuss it again? I don't know. It's very much Sidney Lumet. It's not very Jewish, but it's just somebody trying to do the right thing.
Great show.
Yes, Steve Zimmerman.
Yeah, I just want to ask one last question, if I may. Was anybody else surprised by the decision of David to take the fall for the cheating? Say, okay, I'll take the blame.
Yeah.
I was surprised. I didn't.
Yeah, I was too. Yeah, it's a great stroke of the film, and it's like he's just trying to be true. He signed the same oath. So in a way, he's saying, even though it's going to hurt me, I will take the fall because you guys are blaming me, and I have to abide by that. So,
I have trouble understanding that.
What I just said or his motivation?
No, not what you said. Well, his motivation and his thinking. I mean, part of an honor code is you don't lie about what you did or didn't do. So I don't know. There's an inherent contradiction in there.
Well, and he's pointing it out. He turns from the doorway. He says, I'm going to lie to protect your lies. You know, it's something like that when he's leaving the founder's room, they call it. But, and in the final scene with the headmaster and the priest, he says, but, you know, I lied and so did Van Pelt. And they agreed, yeah, they could be thrown out, but the honor code is a living thing, meaning it's up for interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, which I thought was a bit of a dodge, you know, there's other ways to get around it more directly, but I didn't write it. But then the interesting thing happens, which was a bit dismaying for me. David Green says to him, okay, I'm going to stay. They beg him to stay because it looks bad if he leaves because of this. But you used me and I'm going to use you now. And you're going to make sure I get into Harvard.
I kind of like that he said that.
Yeah, me too. I thought, right on, you go, boy.
Okay, but you see, that's the manipulative Jew who's so determined he's going to turn the tables on the bad guys and he's going to tighten the screws in the other direction. And it was amusing, but I thought it was it was satisfying to me too.
Jim, calling it the manipulative Jew is like saying that, you know, that women who are assertive or aggressive and it's inappropriate.
Right, I totally agree.
It's not, it was a reasonable thing for him to do, and he didn't need to apologize for it. And saying that that's what people think of us and we shouldn't be clever like that, screw that.
Yeah.
Right on, Fern. Right on, Fern.
Yay.
So you can be clever and moral at the same time.
And
Jim, I wanted to say one little thing about the art direction, the desks. Do you all remember those desks that you lifted up and they had the little slot for the pencils? It was just so nice to see that after, 60 years or whatever.
I enjoy seeing all the actors, the young people, Ben Affleck and Chris O'Donnell and some of the others. I thought, boy, they were
Awesome.
Who did Ben Affleck
Damon was
play?
terrific. If you were
He was one of the boys. He was one of the
Did
boys.
he have any featured role? Because I never
Chris
recognized.
Not a big
yeah.
role. He was just one of the.
He's
He
one
was
of the
one of the
top. No,
boys.
he was quite
He's
high.
one of the boys.
Yeah.
He sat next to Green, I think, at one occasion to his right, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And then
Okay,
there was
last
Damon
comments.
and Chris O'Donnell.
Quickly,
and
Brad and
I
then Frank.
remember he had his shirt on.
Yeah,
It was great.
that quote that you just gave there, Jim, about the honor code and tweaking the honor code. That was really a bullshit line because they didn't want to lose their quarterback.
Yeah.
Right,
That's what
right.
that was all about.
Right, I totally agree. And he goes along with it, but it's tit for tat, it's like I can do this, you do it, and I know you do it, and you're gonna accept this and you're gonna do it for me. It's again, turning the tables on your oppressor so that you have equal footing. Okay, Frank, and then Arla for the last word.
I just wanted to say that unlike a lot of the films we've discussed previously with shades of gray and whatever and various interpretations, this is a very straightforward, simple plot line. Yes, predictable in many ways, in a lot of ways. It had a message to give, and it did it very clearly, unequivocally. And just want to point out, maybe that's why we didn't have that much disagreement here. We all seem to agree because it was very straightforward.
We had more to talk about too because it was so clear.
Yeah, it's true.
We've never gone till 9 o'clock. Arla?
Yes. So 3 comments. First of all, I was not surprised when David lied because it was the honorable thing to do. He had no choice. He had signed the honor code, and the honor code said that you had to go with the decision that the majority made. So basically, when they all said he did it, he had no choice but to say, yes, I confess. So I saw that as being in character with the justice, his seeking justice. Now, for the line when he said, you used me for football and I'll use you to get into Harvard, what jumped into my head at that point was, that's a Yiddish cup.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, Vern, I rest my case.
Yeah, that's a Yiddish cup. And then finally, I, like the rest of you, so much enjoyed the film and thought it was so great. I don't understand why it was a big flop at the box office.
Oh,
That was
really?
1992. What can I say?
Yeah.
Too Jewish.
Too Jewish, right?
Maybe.
Okay, but query, if he was going to use them to get into Harvard, why was he going to say that he cheated and it would have gotten him kicked out of the school and out of Harvard?
To be honorable.
Yeah, but he would have been thrown out. He wouldn't have gotten into Harvard.
He couldn't have gotten into Harvard had he been thrown out.
Right.
Yeah.
But
since
I'm
they
going to
weren't
use it to
throwing
get
him
into
out,
Harvard.
they're not throwing him out shows their duplicity. So okay, if you can do it, I will too. It's fairness. It's what are lawyers? Is it restorative justice?
Well, it's quite a gamble, I'd say, eh?
Well, what does he have to lose? He said, I'm not going to kill myself if I get into Harvard. Remember that scene on the dock?
Yeah, I remember that. But he also said, I want to get in Harvard. So
I want to, but if I don't, I'm not going to kill myself. Okay, this was a great discussion. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I'm on the prowl for films like this. Believe me, they are few and far between.
Good one.
I don't know what we're going to see in 2 weeks, but 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have another meeting. And thank you for the lively discussion. It was great.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great 2 weeks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye, everybody.
I
You think what?
he wasn't, after he came to the school, he made friends, he fit in.
Pre-Jew.
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 And, right, and he was really happy at the school. Then, all of a sudden, they find out he's Jewish, say, you lied to us. They didn't speak to him, they called him names, they did all kinds of, then it was very uncomfortable for him. So at that point, he's thinking, do I need another, semester of this?
I guess so.
The fact that also he might have thought, okay, I did my job. I got beat the team you were supposed to. I was your quarterback. You're done with me. So now you're going to throw me out. I know it was Dylan, but it's my word against his. You're choosing him. And obviously you would choose him. He's been there for 4 years or however many years, the prep school. And so for him, I don't think that it was that difficult a choice, because if he stayed, then it would have been more uncomfortable. I don't know how more, no one was speaking to him. So I don't know how more uncomfortable it could be, but it wouldn't be a good scene. So I don't think he had anything to lose.
An opinion I would respect. Two things. One, I think that he wanted to stay there and use it as a vehicle, and he was going to put up with it. Two, I think that the environment post Dylan being found guilty would have been very different. And particularly amongst the tall guy who finally set things straight.
Yeah.
I also, I mentioned it to you, Zimmerman said the same thing. It took quite a bit of chutzpah for the father to send him into this den, the lion's den of Goyamville.
But don't forget, he already already was fighting the Goyim in Scranton.
Yeah, but we know what
He-
Scranton was like, because we,
But Scranton was a rough town.
yeah,
And
but
maybe
there were
the father-
Jews there. We know that.
There were some Jews there.
There were a lot of Jews. That
Not the ones
synagogue,
he was,
that synagogue was very old at
Yeah.
Edmund Phyllis.
right, not,
But
But-
anyway,
but he,
I just
it
thought
wasn't
it was,
like,
I thought
he
it was
was-
a very interesting decision from a father perspective.
I think so too.
And I'm not even sure that the father went to see the school. In those days, you didn't do that.
He didn't do that.
No. And I'm going to take a piss break. Good session. Joyce is having a sleepover at quarters.
Really?
I don't know if they use that to go out.
Oh, I don't think so.
No. They wouldn't let her.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't.
Really?
Unless there's already different rooms before they left or something like that.
You ready?
No, I have to go to bed.
Well,
I'm sorry, but I have.
Your
to finish
timing.
the route.
your timing is of question.
Oh, please.
You coming back?
I'm coming back. I have to go to the bathroom.
I know, but the bathroom's the other way.
Seriously?
Seriously. Don't want you to get confused.
Are we doing sunshine? She wants to come to America. Is that where we left off?
I heard you returning home.
Huh?
Look,
Yeah.
ready? Wait. I'm not getting the sound.
부탁이 아니라 고백을 해야 하는 거야. 사랑하고 있다고. 그러나 네가 그러나 그 거짓말에 눈물아 내 전부를 거는 거고. 지금 저쪽은 날 위해서 어디까지 가는 거야? 예.
Beats me.
도착하셨습니다.